I'm going to follow the two people who've just gone before me, but thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I've had a rather unconventional career path, and I throw my hands up and confess I'm not a bioinformatician, but I work with bioinformaticians. I love working with people like Wynne, like Nikki, and so I have forged a career of sorts in bioinformatics, but it's not the typical bioinformatics career. So I'm the head of training at the EBI, and this really is a massive juggling act. I'm basically responsible for the external training program at the EBI. We started it off in about 2006, 2007, from gathering together some disparate things that individual teams were doing. Very little of what we've done is original, actually. It was all down to the thinking of other people, but we've put it together into something coherent and something that I think serves a very useful purpose for the community. And so basically, you know, there is no typical day for me. I have to juggle managing my team, which is now about 15 people, managing the program itself. We have a whole load of different projects, so trying to fit in the core job function at the EBI with all of these different projects, which are really exciting, and I really love doing them, but sometimes they have a tendency to pull you in different directions, and you have to try and stay focused on something. I'm doing a few bits and pieces that are really fun and completely voluntary, and trying to sort of fit in the stuff that is driven by your paymasters and the stuff that is totally voluntary, and getting the balance right between those two things is always a challenge for me, because I just want to do the stuff where you're being a do-gooder and you're doing all of this stuff voluntarily, but there are only 24 hours in the day, and how do you balance those two things? And then, of course, you've got the money to deal with, you've got the travel to deal with, and you've got the thing that's in shortest supply of all, which is time. So it's a case of just trying to juggle all of those things. I came to this point via a rather unusual route. I studied preclinical medicine. I thought I was going to be a pathologist when I started out. So and really, you know, my education was frightfully conventional. I went to a girls' high school and did physics, chemistry, biology A-level, and was kind of driven into doing medicine because that's what you did if you did those A-levels. So I went into medicine, and then kind of realized that actually I loved science. So I ditched the medicine and did a PhD in biochemistry instead, working on phosphoinositide kinases. I was the only girl in the lab. That was quite interesting. After that, I kind of accidentally fell into various editorial roles. I started out as a locum sub-editor on a journal called Trends in Cell Biology, and kind of gradually over 10 years worked my way through to be launch editor of Nature Reviews Cancer in 2001. I'd been in publishing for 10 years by that point, and you start to feel like a hamster on a wheel. You're constantly thinking about 3 different issues of the journal, and you're churning stuff out, basically. And I loved the science, but I wanted to do something different with it. And I saw a job ad at the EBI, and it was an advert for a Go curator. And I thought, this is different. It's not an upwards move, it's definitely a sideways move, but I think I can do that, and I think it's going to be really exciting, so I'll apply for it. And I had the craziest interview I have ever had in my entire life. The only question I was asked was before the actual interview itself, because I arrived there early. Michael Ashburner, who was interviewing me, had also arrived early. He was sitting and having a coffee outside the diner at the on the Genome campus. And he just sat me down, bought me a coffee, and stuck his elbows on the table and said, "So why the fuck do you want to leave nature?" And that was the only question he asked me. And weirdly, although I interviewed for this Go Curator's job, I didn't end up doing the Go Curator's job at all. Michael and Graham saw something in my CV. They'd been thinking about hiring an outreach person for the EBI, and they looked at my CV and thought, actually, she could do that. Let's open a post for an outreach person. So for the first 6 months at the EBI, I was juggling 2 jobs. I was trying to be a Go curator and trying to be the outreach officer at the EBI. I put 1 term into the gene ontology. And so at that point, they realised I was not going to be a Go curator. and they let me do outreach full time. And they hired a very, very smart Go curator who did a hell of a lot more work on Go than I did. So I've done a few other bits and pieces while I've been there. I sort of, again, morphed into the training position simply because Graham took me on one side and said, we need someone to do training. I want you to do it. And I said, I've got too much on with outreach. I'm not sure I want to do this. And he said, well, if you don't do it, I'm going to hire someone in between you and me. And you're not going to like that, are you? So you better do it. So I did. And I'm really, really glad I made that decision because running the training program at the EBI has been a tremendous challenge. It's been enormous fun and I get a huge amount out of it. And now I've ditched the outreach stuff and training is my lifeblood. Yeah, and along with the training responsibility have come a whole load of other fun things. I've done some stuff with Elixir, which is this new distributed research infrastructure for biological data in Europe. I represent Elixir on a crazy project called MTrain, which is looking at education and training across all of the biomedical sciences, and bioinformatics is only a tiny part of it. But so I end up doing things like competency profiles in safety sciences and working in clinical development and all sorts of stuff that's got nothing to do with bioinformatics. Well, nothing obvious to do with bioinformatics, but then somehow ends up having something to do with bioinformatics at the end of the day. I've been having a lot of fun working with the clinical bioinformatics community now that the 100,000 Genomes Project has started in the UK. They need to educate everyone in the UK National Health Service, and they've been calling on people at the EBI to help them build competency profiles and curricula for clinical bioinformatics. That's really scary because I've never worked in clinical practice despite starting out as a medic, and I've been working with Win on that as well, actually. But it's also, again, been tremendous fun. So I see myself as a life scientist. I see myself very much as a generalist with a bird's eye view of the molecular life sciences, and that's something that's driven me throughout my career. And I have become really passionate about enabling others to make the most of publicly accessible data. But as I said at the beginning, I am most definitely not a bioinformatician. So Michelle asked us to differentiate between what was planned and what was completely serendipitous. The things that were planned were the fact that I've been fascinated by the living world all my life, much like Win. I was fascinated by plants from the age of about 3, gardened all my life. I was an obsessive bird watcher as a little girl, and I fell in love with molecules at the age of 11. As I mentioned earlier, I was really driven into a career in medicine because that's what bright girls in an all-girls school did. But I never really wanted to be a conventional doctor. And once I was at university, that fact became really, really clear to me, and I realised there were other opportunities and went off and did research instead. And at that point, everything turns into pure serendipity and opportunism. I'm afraid to say I have not been a good example to what I advocate. I planned none of this. So, I only ended up in publishing because my postdoc position fell through, and a friend in the lab thought that I'd make a good sub-editor. He thought I'd done a good job of writing my thesis. It was clear to him, although it wasn't clear to me, that I was a better science communicator than I was a scientist, and he turned out to be absolutely right. I would like to echo what Win has said about finding a good mentor. Because Phil pointed me in the right direction at that point in my career. We're still very good friends, and I still go to him when I need wisdom. And I need a lot of wisdom because I've not got much myself. When I finally got tired of publishing, again, it was my friends, it was my social connections that led me to take an interest in the EBI and go down this rather weird turn for someone who'd been in publishing for 10 years. And again, the mentorship, if you can call it that, of Graham and Michael, very, very different mentoring styles, I have to say. And their vision was what set me on the right path. And So really what's happened since then is more down to their talents than it is to mine. Common threads. Yep. Having a broad but shallow overview of science. It's an embarrassing thing to confess, but it's true. Ability to stick to deadlines is something that's driven me throughout my career. The fact that, like Nikki, I look outside of science for my inspiration. The design for the Nature Reviews journals came from a gardening magazine. I've learnt to respond to criticism, and I'd like to thank Fran, because she gave our training programme a real slating when we came to to the Whitehead to train, and every word that she said was accurate, and it was hard to take, but it's actually transformed our approach to training, so thank you, Fran. And then the final thing is understanding that I need people in my team who are very, very different from me, and so I basically rely on being surrounded by people who are far smarter than me and have a far more structured approach to their work than me, and also who have much better people skills than me, because I have shit people skills. So I mean, the way to do it is to work with smart people, and then it doesn't matter how bizarre and unconventional and dopey you are. I want to end with a few professional development resources. If, like me, you really have no clue where your talents lie, and if, like me, you need a little bit of help with that along the way, there are some really, really great resources out there for you. So I would strongly advocate going and looking at some of the information that's on the LifeTrain website. The Science Careers site is absolutely fantastic. They've put together a really lovely individual development planner that asks you to focus on where your real strengths lie and build on those. For the bioinformatics specific careers, take a look at the stuff that we've been doing in the ISCB education and training curriculum. The ISCB Education and Training Committee. It has a curriculum task force that's been working on CPD for different strands of bioinformatics. And if you'd like to have some input into that, do come along to the Birds of a Feather session that we're running tomorrow lunchtime. It would be great to have your input on it. And with that, thank you very much for your time, and I will shut up.